everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about grain intake and the data that's out there looking at grain intakes on people, and the people who consume more grains actually have lower rates of most types of mortalities. Let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And I'm going to link two different studies for you guys down below. And you guys can look through those things. One of them is just kind of looking at food groups and all risk mortality. And the other one was a recent meta-analysis done last year on whole grain intake and rates of different diseases. And you see some interesting stuff in the data. And again, this is stuff that people need to slap in the face of anyone who comes promoting ketogenic diets or paleo diets or whatever for health. These people are not basing their opinions upon science. They're basing it usually on anecdote, poorly thought out opinions, just bizarre concepts that aren't actually based in reality. They're great trendy diets. They're great trendy diets, and for some people these sort of diets can work for weight loss because they can have, if certain foods are consumed in certain ways, can blunt appetite a little bit. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be ideal diets for long-term health, and that's what people need to be thinking about with fitness. Not just what's going to give you fat loss, but what's going to help you live longer and be healthier. What diets are going to give you the lowest rates of cancer? What diets are going to give you the lowest rates of diabetes? These are pretty important questions to ask ourselves. And when we look at it, this is one of the things. When you look at the science, the actual raw data in science, no reasonable person would look at it and conclude just the evidence that they could see out there without someone writing a crazy book to give them ideas otherwise. If someone were to just look at the raw data, look at countries, cultures around the world, diets, everything else, no reasonable person would conclude that grains are unhealthy. And not even just whole grains, but grains in general. No one would draw that conclusion just looking at the sum of the data and the epidemiology and everything else. And it doesn't matter what counter arguments people have, because they can claim whatever they want. They can say, well, this study in pigs or this study in rats showed this sort of substance found inside grains caused inflammation and osteoarthritis or whatever. I can't even talk today. That we saw these problems in their arteries. Okay, but why doesn't that happen in humans then? See, again, why don't we see it in cultures? Why do cultures that eat 70 and 80% white rice in their diet, why don't they have these problems then? And they don't have an answer, because all they have is, well, in pigs, well, you're not a pig. Are you? Are you a pig? You take little short-term studies on pigs and you're going to draw meaningful conclusions for humans when all the available data says that you're flat wrong? I mean, seriously? Stop and look at what some of these studies show. All right, this meta-analysis showed that whole grain intake was correlated in a dose-dependent relationship, that the more whole grains people consumed, the lower rates they had of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancers. In other words, whole grains, this is what they looked at with just whole grains compared to general diets, just normal mainstream diets. Same thing, look at countries like a lot of Asian countries and look at their statistics. You'll find regions that live on mostly white rice. They don't have heart disease. They don't have diabetes or any of that at appreciable rates. So this idea that these sort of problems are going to be caused by consuming grains isn't based in reality. I mean, honestly, very, very few people have ever become obese with large amounts of body fat from consuming grains. Okay, it's not the grains that are causing it. It's the other stuff you're throwing on top of the grains that are causing it. People don't seem to realize that they're combining huge amounts of fat with these refined grains, and that's usually what their problem is. People who put butter on everything. People who put butter and jelly on everything. I mean, all the butter, shortening, look at a lot of the pastries and stuff, and people are talking about, well, pastries, that's the refined grains are my problem. And they'll think of something like a donut or cake. The grains don't even make up that significant of a portion of the calories in some of these foods. When you really look at what's in them, the grains oftentimes are only about 30% sometimes, or in some cases 20% of the total calories in the food. They take up the bulk of it. They take the bulk of the size up, but they're not where the energy sources are in there. It's all the added sugars, all the added shortening, butter, everything else. That's what's in these substances. And then donuts are, of course, fried in oil. But people will then blame grains as if grains are the culprit. But the reality is the data doesn't reflect that. The data doesn't reflect that. And if grain intake was correlated with obesity, you would see diabetes and heart disease in there also, because we know obesity by itself, irrespective of the cause, is associated and directly causes diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So then why are these things all lower in the populations that eat the most grains? Well, simply put, because if you're consuming more grains, you're consuming less butter, you're consuming less refined sugar, you're consuming less vegetable oils, because you're consuming grains in place of them. Grains are not inherently fattening. They're reasonably appetite suppressing. And all this talk about anti-nutrients and people talking about, well, lecithin or whatever it's called, stimulates issues with leptin, and that causes appetite in pigs and rats. But these are animals that also have a very different metabolism from us in a lot of different ways, and people need to understand that. Our metabolism and digestive enzymes are not as similar as you might think. A lot of these animals, for example, store carbs at a much, much easier rate as body fat than humans do. Humans don't actually convert carbs to body fat at an appreciable rate. We really don't. We really don't under most conditions. So that alone is going to give you a difference when it comes to various carb sources, even with these animals. And it's something that you have to factor in. So this idea that people have that grains are inherently bad for some reason, it isn't based upon reality. When you start looking at people's problem foods, when you look at them as grains, it's actually not the rice, it's not the wheat, it's not the oats that's causing the problem. It's the other things they're adding to it. It's the other things. It's not the grains that are the inherent problem. Because again, the reality is people and societies who consume more grains have lower rates of diabetes, heart disease, cancer. Okay, across the board. Grains are part of a healthy diet. In fact, we could argue reasonably, based upon all the available data and science out there, that grains are very likely the foundation of a healthy diet. There's no reason grains can't be your staple intake. Your staple source of nutrition is your primary source of calories, and still be extremely healthy. In fact, the evidence would suggest that people who do so tend to be healthier. You know what? And there is no real argument that people have against that, because they don't have data to support it. And you know, here's the other thing. People will get into conspiracy theories to support stuff and say, well, the science is based upon big wheat. You know, instead of big pharma, big meat, whatever, big wheat. Well, let me ask you a simple question. What company benefits from grains being promoted as a food source for humans over other things? What companies really benefit from that? Do the grain companies really? No. Here's why. If you were to consume more of your calories from, say, meat, red meat, which I'm a big fan of, even though it's been shown that large amounts of red meat, unless it's really lean, it's maybe not the healthiest thing in the world, but it's still a dose-dependent relationship between problems. But if we want to be honest about the data and honest about funding, if people consume less factory farmed meat and more grains, does the grain industry benefit? No, the grain industry loses money. What? Yeah, because what do you think they grow all these animals on? Don't you think it takes more grains to grow out your cow to get the amount of meat that you're going to eat off of it than if you would just consume the same amount of food in the form of grains? In other words, I believe the estimate is to grow 1,000 calories of meat, it takes 7,000 calories of grains. So what conspiracy theory do people have to claim that this is going to be biased science? When it's agreed that multiple scientists in multiple countries and multiple meta-analysis keep finding this over and over and over and over, that grains are pretty healthy. Grains are the staple of a healthy diet. There's no reasonable data coming back showing otherwise, and repeated meta-analysis come back to this over and over and over. So, again, what conspiracy theories do people have that are going to show otherwise? I mean, what's your fallback position? They don't have one. They don't have one. And it's understandable, because there are times when politics, there are times when government, there are times when businesses do interfere with research. All right, and that is a very real thing, and it is something that we need to be concerned with, because, again, government policy can dictate science and funding. All right, that does happen, and that happens a lot. But in this case, where's your potential conspiracy theory? There isn't one that I can see. Seriously, you want people to eat more grains? All the data is showing that you live longer. And again, you can't even claim that that's a conspiracy to lower the population, because look at the countries that have been doing it for centuries. They have lower rates. Any East Asian country that consumes white rice all day. White rice is their staple food source. They have less diabetes, heart disease, and cancer than we do. They're eating better than we are. Food for thought. They don't have all the table sugar, all the really fatty cuts of meat, the butter, the vegetable oil. They don't have all of that to go with it. That's why they don't have problems, because the grains aren't the problem. It's all this other junk we add to it in excess. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.